Good evening from Red Line TV. And tonight we've got a, I think, very necessary discussion happening, because from the leadership of the Labour Party to the summer of discontent, we seem to be lurching from one political crisis to another. One theme that seems to link them all is the attempt to frame and excuse each one of these crises by saying things like, well, at least it wasn't Corbyn, and we had Johnson, but at least it wasn't Corbyn. Of course, by Corbyn, what they actually mean is the left. But what should the left's response be? And which way do we go now? Tonight, we'll be looking at three key areas: the cost of living crisis, the significance of the defenestration of Johnson, and the role of the Labour movement, in particular the trade union and, of course, the Labour Party. And we'll be putting our questions to Graham Bash, veteran one-time Labour activist, ex-Labour MP Chris Williamson, and of course to you, the viewers. And you'll have your chance to put your questions to the panel.
Yes, welcome, Chris, and welcome, Graham. This is quite an important discussion. It goes to the heart of, what we're all about and how we should organize, etc. First, we wanted to look a little bit at the mess that is the Tory party at the moment. And I've read today in the paper, there's talk of Boris Johnson now becoming an envoy to the Ukraine, which is almost as perverse as Tony Blair becoming Middle East peace envoy after the role he's played and devastating the whole region there. But leaving that aside, more seriously, Johnson has sat out much bigger scandals than what happened over Pincher. I mean, the last 2 years really was one crisis after another. Why do you think he's resigned now? And what do you think this change of leadership means for the country, for the Tories? Do you want to start with Graham and then Chris, please?
Well, of course, we've got to put this in its context, which is an economic context, the cost of living crisis, as you say, the economic crisis post-Brexit, post-COVID, post-Ukraine war. But that alone doesn't at all explain what's happened, because it was the political crisis that did for Johnson. As we know, the Partygate, the Owen Paterson, and now the Pincher. This just ate away at his credibility. Had this not happened, he would have survived. Now, what does it mean? Well, if you look at what's happened so far with the Tory leadership, it looks as if they're all fighting each other to see who can be more reactionary, more right-wing. And of course, tax cuts read a tax on public services, a tax on public sector pay. And today is it that we've heard about the coming ASLEV strike. And I think that this summer of discontent isn't going to be stopping anytime soon. And it could well lead to an autumn, indeed a winter of discontent. And it, of course, raises some fundamental questions for the Labour and trade union movement. This is not good news for Starmer, but we can discuss that, I'm sure, during the programme.
Chris, do you think it's a useful slogan, a general election now? Because there is obviously, there's a sort of democratic deficit now that people hadn't voted for whoever is coming in now and their team. Do you think that's a useful slogan?
Not really, because who would be replacing the Conservative Party if the Labour Party were to win? They are just as committed to the neoliberal, imperialist, warmongering agenda as the Tories are, very clearly committed to NATO. But this cost of living crisis that Graham referred to, I mean, it's been 46 years in the making, ever since Denis Seeley stupidly went to the IMF on a false premise in 1976 and heralded in the kind of first neoliberal monetarist government. And it was turbocharged by Thatcher, and it's just been getting worse year on year thereafter. Yes, we've had some, good years in the sense that, the economy was doing okay. And so there were some crumbs from the table. But when things went wrong, we went wrong very, very badly for millions and millions of people. And in that intervening period, of course, our industry has been hollowed out and offshored to low-wage economies. Trade unions have been destroyed in terms of their power anyway. You look at the membership today to what it was. It's great to see that there is some fight back now. So I think, for me, what we need to be focusing on is not so much a general election, because I think we need to be building an alternative to the Labour Party, but I think we also need to wean ourselves off, not just voting for the Labour Party, but wean ourselves off the notion that somehow politics, democracy, is all about putting an X in a box once every few years and electing people to go and represent us in Parliament or in the town hall. And I think we need to be moving away from the model of so-called representative democracy, because the people that they're representing ain't us, it's the corporate elites. And we need to be pushing for a system of participatory democracy. And I think the way to achieve that is to, obviously, through the trade union movement, through raising political consciousness, through direct action, and groups like Palestine Action are leading the way. And they're demonstrating that it's possible to bring about change in spite of, not because of, the political class. They've already chased out Eldert from its London HQ. They've closed down a factory in Oldham. They're taking action again in Scotland against Thales, I think one of the world's biggest arms manufacturers. And that's a sort of approach, I think, that we need to be embracing and really taking heart from those examples like that, and around the world in places like Bolivia, Latin America, where we saw, particularly in Bolivia, US-backed coup was overturned in less than 12 months, thanks to the movement towards socialism, which isn't just about electing people to their representative assembly. It's strength in depth. It's in the trade union movement. It's in civil society. And what they did was to bring the country to a standstill. And just in conclusion, what I was saying when I was going around on the Democracy Roadshow, Tina, was that we will need a mass movement on the streets if we can elect a Corbyn-led Labour government that then delivers upon the programme that we were promising to do. And that was obviously debated whether they would have gone through with some of the stuff, certainly with the PLP that we had. Let's assume that we did that. There would be huge pressure and steps taken by the establishment to actually sabotage that, with the potentiality of a coup, which was being seriously considered against Harold Wilson. And my point was, we will need people on the street to defend that Labour government. Now, we didn't get the Labour government. We still need, in my opinion anyway, people on the street. That's not to give up on, representative democracy completely, but if we just put all our eggs in that basket, I think we're going to be sorely disappointed. Industrial action, direct action, in my opinion, is the way to go to, if you like, supplement and complement any sort of, representative democracy that we might still engage in over the intervening years.
Can I ask you a follow-up question on that, which is the idea, and Graham hates me asking this question, but in a country like Germany, for example, where I'm from, the electoral system is vastly different. So you have a proportional representation, a system of proportional representation, which forces the left together and forces them, unites them to put forward parliamentary candidates, etc. There's still divisions, they have platforms, etc. Despite it being quite a Zionist organization, Die Linke, it does have representation in parliament and outside, on the streets. Is, the need, a change of the electoral system, do you see that as something important? I mean,
It's crucial, in my opinion.
There's differences.
I think it's crucial, Tina. I mean, I used to be opposed to proportional representation. It seemed to be like an anorak sort of cul-de-sac, a psephologist sort of cul-de-sac, or something that only the Liberal Democrats were interested in. And I think that really has meant that people haven't really taken it seriously. And I think those of us on the left, those of us who believe in socialism, who genuinely believe in democracy, we need to be embracing it, and we need to be, calling for it in a way as a vehicle, as the catalyst to bring about some of the change which is desperately needed, and to get it out of that sort of Liberal Democrat cul-de-sac, as it were, and to actually, argue that this is a useful and potential tool to actually, to kick over the traces, really, and without that, it's going to be very, very difficult. But of course, we're stuck with the present system, and it serves the interests of the Tories, it serves the interests of the Labour Party, and they will not Turkey's voting for Christmas, they won't, in my opinion anyway, vote for any electoral change. So we need to work with the system that we currently have. And I think the way to do that, notwithstanding what I just said, Tina, about, I think, most of the action needs to be in the workplace or industrial action, and hopefully that's going to be stepping up, but also through direct action, civil society sort of, getting on the streets, as it were. But I think it's in terms of that electoral process, because, I think we should give up on the Labour Party. It's a bloody shit show. It's dead. It's gone. We need to, finish it off now. But to actually mount any meaningful challenge, and even then that's going to be incredibly difficult, we've got to collaborate. We've got to work together. And the left has never really ever been able to do that. And finally, don't underestimate the role of the state, because if we start, we've never ever succeeded yet. And, we set up Resist with a view to trying to bring about that collaboration. Indeed, the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition, set up by Bob Cohen and Dave Nellis and others, was also about bringing the left outside the Labour Party together. Never really been successful. But when we start to make progress, and I think we're in a good place to potentially, only potentially, start to make progress in that direction, the state, if they're not already, will be all over it. And the thing that this establishment in this country are past masters at is divide and rule. That's how they run the world's most successful empire. That's how they keep their power right now. And, let's not help them. Let's not do their bloody job for them by falling out amongst ourselves. Let's, settle it. We don't have to agree with everything, but we need to work together if we're going to have any chance of actually, challenging the status quo.
I thought this might happen, that the whole discussion gets into one. We would try to look at different subjects, but we'll come back to that. I want to ask Graham, though, first, because we did have a little debate amongst ourselves there. Like the Campaign for Labour Party Democracy, I was quite surprised. At last year's conference, there was a PR motion, and they asked their supporters to vote against it at Labour Party conference for proportional representation. The idea behind it is that in order to get a clear Labour majority, a Labour government, you need to have first past the post, which has, of course, the problem that it disenfranchises up to 49% in an area. Graham, what do you think about it?
I will answer this, Tina, but let me answer it in my own way, because I think that what Chris said hits at the root of this discussion, because he was both, in my opinion, profoundly right and profoundly wrong. And I say that.
You sound like a Liberal Democrat now, comrade.
Yep, no, you're both, but that was on different things. Let me explain. The crucial, correct thing you said, which is absolute and has always been central, certainly to my political thinking, is that the movement for change has to come from below, in the trade unions, on the streets. And I'm glad you mentioned Palestine Action, which I totally support. And this kind of action, like the poll tax movement in a previous generation, is absolutely central. Remember, it was a poll tax movement that helped bring down Thatcher. So, and of course, the trade unions in the 70s brought down a Tory government in 1974. I get it, and it's absolutely central. And one of the great weaknesses of the Labour left is that they've looked to parliamentary representative democracy politics only. That is our ABC. In the beginning is class struggle, but it needs a political expression. It needs a governmental expression. And if it starts in the streets and in the workplace, which it must do, if it just stays there, it will actually dissipate and go nowhere. Now, that does bring the question of the Labour Party. Chris, I've been around long enough, and I'm actually, I don't want to play the age game, but I know I'm much older than you, I think. I've probably seen the Labour Party called dead on dozens and dozens of occasions. Now, I'm going to say something here that it's nearer to dead than any time in my lifetime. Let me make that clear. And it is that in that situation, because the way in which any democratic procedures have been scrapped has never been matched, certainly since I joined the party in 1969. But let's just remember a few things before we write off something which has been around for 125 years or 122 years. Firstly, the Labour Party has more socialists in it by probably a factor of 30, 40 or 50 than all the socialists in all the fringe groups put together. And it has now the only trade union affiliations. Now that the RMT, as I understand it, has decided to disaffiliate from the Trade Union Socialist Coalition, that means the question of the trade union link still remains central. And to me, it raises the central question for me of this winter of discontent. It's magnificent to see a return to this kind of class politics that perhaps we haven't seen in a generation, but which defined my early years in politics in the 70s. And yet, unless that finds a political expression, it becomes a kind of syndicalism which actually avoids the question of political trade unionism. And so my attitude is this: for those who remain in the Labour Party, I will get to the question of PR, Tina, don't worry. For those who remain in the Labour Party, and I urge everyone who hasn't been expelled to do so, is to try, and this includes the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs, to link up openly in practice with the fight of our movement and of our class. And there is absolutely no point, and I agree with this, of being in the Labour Party if you're just going to do the usual old Labour left thing, batten down the hatches, try to be invisible, don't raise your head above the parapet for the sake of avoiding expulsion. So I think it was a big error, to be honest, when our comrades in the Socialist Campaign Group actually withdrew their names from the Stop the War Coalition's statement on NATO. It was a wrong thing to do, because once you've done that, where do you go? Whenever you raise any socialist alternative, you're going to be chopped. But I've just seen it happen too often that we write off the Labour Party. And it is more than possible, I mean, everything that exists will at some time die. And if the Labour Party has reached that point, or will have reached that point, because I don't think it has, though it's near to it, then our task will only be to rebuild a mass party of Labour. I'm not interested in creating a socialist sect. There's dozens of them, Chris. And I think you're probably going to add to the number soon by setting up another one. I support you all, and I work, of course we work together. I work with you. Even though I don't agree with you on the Labour Party, I work with you on all sorts of things.
Graham, what about the Revolutionary Party?
To get to your question, I have slightly changed my position on PR. I am a traditional opponent of PR because for the same reason that you said CLPD opposed it. But given the state of the Labour Party, I now regard the whole thing as a total distraction. It ain't going to happen in our lifetime. Let's talk about the relationship between the Labour Party and the trade unions, how to build a political trade unionism rather than worrying about what the chattering classes talk about, which ain't going to happen in our lifetime, led by the Liberals, which is the electoral system. I think it's a totally secondary question and a distraction.
I think
I never have to talk about. I
actually think that's astonishing, because if the chattering classes are the left speaking to each other on social media, then I'm amazed, because I think it's totally out of contact with what most people are thinking. During the last time we actually had a vote on PR, I unfortunately voted against it. This time, without doubt, I would vote for it, and so would many on the left. And I think you are totally wrong if you think that is not going to be something that people are going to want to have for all sorts of reasons. And how you want to challenge the Labour Party and play within Westminster and yet not have PR is beyond me, because you're, barring revolutionary action, you're not going to get anywhere near it.
Well, that means we're not going to get anywhere near it, because as we all know, there isn't going to be PR on our lifetime.
Who knows it?
And the logic of your position, therefore, comrade, is that you're going to give up on socialist revolutionary struggle. We have to work where we are, I'm afraid.
Who knows it, Graham? You keep on saying what everybody knows. I'm sorry, you're wrong. Many people feel as I do, as Chris does, and as many other people do. We think proportional representation, not just because we want to see, you know, a more a different sort of politics, but because we actually want to give people like us a voice in Parliament is the way to go. And I'm sorry, but to dismiss it in that way, I think is really unfortunate and is a kind of dyed-in-the-wool response.
I was going to ask actually, Graham, I mean, do you not think there is a space for a revolutionary party as well as a Labour Party for, you know, the majority of the working class, etc., but a party that actually, you know, talks about the need to overcome capitalism? And, you know, that should have a reflection, as Jackie said, that kind of political representation that we could have in Parliament, and using it as a platform, not to overthrow, you know, capitalism. You don't do that in Parliament, but using it as a platform like socialists have done throughout history.
I'll answer that. I'm a revolutionary, as you know, and in 1969, I made the two most important decisions of my life, which was one, to join the Labour Party, and two, to become a Trotskyist. There was always a tension between the two, but I've never shifted an inch on either of them. And if we look at revolutionary socialist MPs, then actually the only revolutionary socialist MPs we've ever had have been Labour MPs, I would argue, unless you want to designate some of the Communist Party MPs of 3 or 4 generations ago. And these are the people in my lifetime, such as Terry Fields, Dave Nellis, etc. And I mean, am I in favour of a revolutionary party? Yes. And I'm in favour of that revolutionary party being part of the broad Labour Party that we need to resurrect and rebuild. Because the Labour Party, of course, there's no golden age of Labour, really, except those examples really in my lifetime. And the nearest we've ever come to having a really socialist alternative to the ruling class was in a limited way, and I accept the limitations, when Ben was stood for deputy leader and lost by 0.5%, and when Jeremy won the leadership of the party. And we can discuss all of those lessons, and there are real lessons to be learned, because ultimately those could only have succeeded in alliance with the broader movement, the mass movement, to which we must rebuild, and to which Chris refers. So yes, I'm in favour of a revolutionary party. I'm in favour of revolutionary politics. I'm in favour of fundamentally transforming the power relations in Britain and the world.
Graham, are you familiar with the Norwegian blue parrot?
No, but tell me about it.
Well, in the Monty Python sketch about the dead parrot, that was a Norwegian blue, and the guy said it was dead, and the only way in which she said it was sitting on its perch was because he said, "You nailed it to the perch." And I see the Labour Party in the same way as that dead parrot sketch. What I would recommend you do, Graham, is dig out that sketch on the internet and just replace the Labour Party or parrot. And I think that perfectly sums up where we are with the Labour Party. Well, and actually, just on proportional representation, very briefly, when I was going around the country on the Democracy Roadshow and speaking to members, there was overwhelming support at those Democracy Roadshow meetings for proportional representation, particularly in safe Tory seats. And I spoke at lots of safe Tory seats because they said, our vote just doesn't count here. We end up, you know, we might do a bit of a campaign, but, you know, we're going to end up going elsewhere. But if we had proportional representation, and you could have a hybrid system like they have in Scotland, where you still have constituency link, but you also have a list system, then our vote would count. The popular vote would then count. And, you know, if we'd had it, in fact, at the last election, then Labour's representation in the House would have been a lot higher than it ended up being. Because, I mean, I think by and large, first past the post is, not in every occasion, but by and large, has discriminated against Labour representation when you actually count the numbers up. You think back to 1951, Graham, and you were actually alive, I believe, in 1951, just about.
I don't remember the election.
You won't necessarily remember the election, but Labour achieved the biggest vote ever and lost the bloody election. Yeah. Churchill came back. That was first past the post. So, you know, I'm as I say, I've certainly definitely, like Jackie and others, definitely changed my position. And I think we, as a left, as a socialist, we absolutely have to get behind proportional representation and to argue for it, as I say, a means to an end, as a tool to deliver those sorts of policies that we know are overwhelmingly popular with the overwhelming majority of the people.
Fair enough, Chris, but if this is the message, if this is going to be the main message from this meeting, it's really sad. I do
Well, not the main message, but a message. One of the messages, not the main message, but one of them.
I'm all for recognising parrots are dead, but then we're going to look about how you're going to breed a new type of parrot. And I don't know if your knowledge of parrots goes that deep. I don't know. You
not really, mate. No. I don't
Well,
agree with
let's move on then a little bit. But I think there are different views on the matter, clearly. But let's move on and look at the question of the unions then. The RMT, which is causing some waves, is not affiliated to the Labour Party. Unite has made some noises about, taking itself out of the politics of the Labour Party politics, etc. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Can just the trade union struggle alone, solve the cost of living crisis, for example? Let's start with Graham then.
No, it's been magnificent what's happened, but it's not enough for the reasons I've said. Now, when I first came into kind of revolutionary politics, this unity between the Labour Party and the trade unions was axiomatic. When briefing was set up, our whole aim was to actually fight for power within the Labour Party. Now, as I said in a recent speech I made, looking back on my political life, it's all been a kind of it's been a failure. Of course it has. It's been a miserable failure. But I recognise that. But it doesn't mean to say that wasn't the best chance of achieving it. But look, let's look at the trade union movement. Let's look at the trade union movement today. In many ways, what's happened in Unite, for instance, is a great, huge step forward. This militancy which it's engendered is something that I applaud and I support. And I actually am a Unite member, and I didn't vote for Sharon Graham. And actually, I think probably on balance, I was wrong. But I didn't do so because I felt that she represented a really important strand of trade unionism that wasn't seeking political answers. And at one level, I can understand that because there aren't immediate answers available. The Labour Party is unusable for anything other than defensive resistance in the immediate future, and it may be forever. But none, as you said, Tina, to begin with, neither are any of the alternatives outside. And we've got to really work out how we can, from within the trade union movement, build alliances with those who are seeking political representation. Because just as Labour Party politics without mass action is useless, then trade unionism without the struggle for political representation is not by no means useless, but it does come across real limitations. So is it adequate? No. Is it an enormous step forward that we've seen in the last few months? It's given me more hope than I've had in some years.
Chris?
Yeah, well, I'm in broad agreement with what Graham has said there. I mean, I think, that industrial action without kind of a political expression, is, I wouldn't say pointless, but it doesn't take us very far. And what I'm hoping is that the trade union movement won't just focus on that kind of industrial action, won't just focus on the workplace, but will engage in a broader, political mobilization or help to facilitate that. And one of the things which I think the trade unions should have done a long, long time ago is to, for example, support an alternative media platform. I know we've got what we're on tonight and so on, but I mean, I think that, something like a trade union support for that, using its massive resources, the union movement's massive resources to give it a huge push, I think would be really beneficial in terms of raising political consciousness. I mean, Unite is a good model in many ways. I mean, they've got Unite Community and they're doing some work in the community, but we need to be building that up, in my opinion, and we need to be doing, I think, the sort of things that Jeremy was talking about, community organizing and so on. And I think the trade union movement could do worse than actually lending some of their resources to help to facilitate that kind of civil society, to facilitate that political action, that political consciousness raising, which is so crucial, because there is massive propaganda, as we know. I mean, this is why we see on social media, you know, so many people sporting a Ukraine flag without realizing the background to the story, as it were. And I think we had, you know, a greater sort of political consciousness raising, then, you know, people would be more aware of, you know, the background to that conflict, but also, you know, give people the tools, as it were, to have, you know, a better understanding of the way in which, you know, the economy works, the way in which society operates. And I think if, you know, if people, I mean, it's like Henry Ford said, you know, if people understood how the monetary system and the banking system operated, there'd be a revolution by tomorrow morning. Well, I think our job is to bring about that revolution, and the unions could play obviously a massive role, not just, as I say, Tina, in the workplace, but actually in facilitating that action, you know, as I say, out in the wider community as well.
So in terms of the cost of living crisis, then, I mean, this like inflation is presented as, oh, it's a natural phenomenon. There's nothing you can do. What you certainly shouldn't do is ask for higher wages, because we have to protect the economy, which seems madness. And it's being spread by, you know, bourgeois papers left, right, and center. How can we, you know, what can we do to actually tackle that, apart from, you know, I mean, all this, the question of organizing, obviously that is the key question, but how can we educate people on this issue?
Well, we need to be challenging that narrative. I mean, and when back in the old days, when I was a member of the old National Union of Public Employees, before it merged with COSI and NALGO to become Unison, I mean, they regularly did, you know, political education schools, as it were. I know the RMT still do some of that, and I think the unions need to be doing more of that type of activity. It's really important, I think, that, you know, people have a better grounding, a better understanding of how the, you know, the economy operates, etc. And that would then give people the tools so that it wouldn't be so easy then for the media and the politicians to pull the wool over people's eyes. I mean, you know, sometimes people think, well, bloody hell, you know, perhaps we shouldn't be pushing for higher salaries, when we know that the reality is that the vast majority of the income that's generated in this country goes into the pockets of a tiny proportion of the population. And of course, you know, there are a lot of faults with the Labour government. It's always been a tool of the establishment, as I was saying the other day on Crispin's show. But from 45 to 79, that first post-war Labour government did set in train a consensus, a post-war consensus, as it was known, which saw inequality narrowing year on year, right the way through to 1976, after, you know, Healy stupidly went to the IMF, and then it's been going in the opposite direction ever since. And, you know, we were able to, I mean, actually, you know, you look across the Atlantic as well, and, you know, similarly, you know, at a time when tax rates were at their highest, both here and in the States, economic growth was also at its highest as well. So the economy did far, far better. But the other thing I think we need to be talking about with people, and people see these kind of terms bandied about on TV, and, you know, they talk about the GDP growth, and, or, you know, GDP will fall back, etc. I mean, GDP is an incredibly blunt instrument to measure economic success, and not a very appropriate one, actually, because, you know, as I've said, Britain is the fifth biggest economy in the world, and yet we've got 14.5 million people in poverty. Well, how does that work then? Yeah, okay, we've got this really strong economy, and yet we've got all these people. So it's clearly about redistribution, isn't it? And I think giving people that, you know, those tools, that information, really, you know, knowledge, like the old Labour movement maxim, you know, that slogan, knowledge is power. That is really something that we need to be focused on. I know you do sort of great stuff with what you do, Tina, and this show and stuff like that, and you've done lots of, you know, podcasts and things like that. You know, talking about different aspects in that way too. But we've got to somehow spread that much more wide. And this is where I think the trade union movement could have a, you know, big role to play with direct, because they've got a captive audience with their members, and this is the sort of thing they should be talking to their members about.
Yeah, and discussing, you know, as you say, GDP, I mean, is, you know, just measures profit, etc. It doesn't measure, you know, are we producing for people's need, or do we actually cover basic what people require to live a semi-decent life? I mean, Graham, in the Tory leadership elections, they're now outdoing them each other with, you know, who can cut tax more. I mean, it sounds lovely, doesn't it? What was Zahavi? He wants to cut 20% of everything, all public spending. What does that mean in reality?
It doesn't sound lovely at all, of course, because this is, as I said at the start, this equals an attack on our public sector, on our services, and on public sector pay. I just want to quickly come back, and I agree with a lot of what Chris just said. And how do we, quotes, I hate the word educate, but how do we get the message across? Yeah, partly by our journals, our Zooms and all of this. But I'll tell you what's been the biggest learner of all in the recent months or weeks even, was the RMT action. It actually brought the issues to the forefront. And actually the level of support for the RMT was remarkably high, higher than many of us anticipated. And it's action, this kind of organising, which will create the conditions for our message to get across. Revolutionary consciousness, socialist consciousness can only be a consciousness of the actual or potential strength of our movement. If our movement is actually weak, then all the fine educationals in the world won't get us very far, because the ideas will not relate to people's actual conditions. But when people are in, let me finish this, when people are in struggle, that actually helps us and the whole movement get the alternative across. And I think we've learned that very much in the last few weeks.
But it's actually not just action, is it? You know, it's not just action. There's been action before. It's action that's given voice by leadership. And here we come back to the lack of leadership on the left, and certainly the Socialist Campaign Group. Who do we have to speak out for us? Who has the courage to go on what we call, you know, the mainstream media and actually talk in the way that we've seen that dispute being talked about? Very, very few people. And of course, what happens, you know, it's very interesting. He got a week or so of coverage, and when they found he was far too good, he's disappeared from our screens. So, but we still need to give voice to that. So we have to find a way of having action and giving voice as well. That's what leadership is. And that's why it is such, it's not just a tragedy, it's a crime. The Socialist Campaign Group, who have positions of influence and can get on the media, do not speak out. And perhaps what we on the left should be doing is actually having a campaign to get them to say something. I don't know.
Well, can I just say that the old slogan of the 70s, when some things just never change. The old slogans used to be, make the left MPs fight.
Yes.
And that was 50 years ago. I agree with what you said. And so how do we do it? Well, we try to get, at least when it was possible, we tried to get in those positions ourselves, like Chris did, and use the platform to stand out. And Chris, for example, when these fake allegations, largely fake allegations of anti-Semitism, were bandied about, Chris used his position to speak out.
But that's not going to work.
Very, very few others who did it. And I'm afraid that was a tragic error, and one of the big lessons we need to learn from the Corbyn years.
But
we
Graham,
can only stay in the party if we're prepared to speak out.
But Graham, that's not going to work anymore, because candidate after candidate on the left are actually either being ousted. We see 2 people, MPs now, basically who are going to be outed. And certainly in terms of candidates, they're not getting on. So that is not going to work.
We are in this, I agree, and we're in this impasse, aren't we? It's what Gramsci said. We're in this transitional stage between the death of the old world. The old world is dying, the new is waiting to be born. Now is the time of monsters. And nothing is more prescient than what he wrote almost 100 years ago, because it applies to us now. That is exactly the case, and I agree with you.
Chris.
That's why we need something new to be born, comrade, and that's why we need to come together to actually
Chris,
bring that birth about.
So that the Labour left has now very nearly been destroyed through external but also internal factors, as Graham just described. The left outside the Labour Party doesn't look all that attractive either, though, it has to be said. I mean, there's Left Unity, there's Resist, PAL, Task, Workers' Party, Momentum, SWP, Socialist Party, etc., etc. They all have almost identical soft left programs, and yet they can't get it together. What's the way forward? Isn't it high time we actually try to come together on a more principled political socialist program rather than, you know, the lowest common denominator? And we're not talking like stitch-ups like the campaign for, you know, centre-left grassroots alliance or don't leave, organize, or Labour left for socialism, etc. We clearly need something bigger, democratic, open, transparent, but also with a clear socialist program. Is there anything like that happening to your knowledge?
Well, we need to somehow try and make it happen, don't we, Tina? It's not easy to do that, and there are all sorts of forces, not least of which will be the state, that will work its level best to, you know, prevent that from happening. Indeed, may not even wait for it to get any kind of momentum, but to sort of use its infiltrators to strangle any attempt like that at birth. But, you know, we've got to try, in my opinion, to bring about that coalition. And you came along to the Festival of Resistance last year in Nottingham, Tina, and yeah, that was great because we got a lot of different views reflected there on the same platform. I mean, it was great to see. I mean, we got Trotskyists and Stalinists sharing a platform together. It's quite astonishing, really, to see that. So, you know, it can be possible, in my opinion, to do that. And as I say, if we look around the world, where the left has prospered in, you know, in recent history, is where they have come together. You know, Syriza, Podemos, and then, you know, the movement towards socialism in Bolivia and right across, you know, in Venezuela and so on and so forth. Where they've prospered, there's been that kind of collaboration, and so it's possible to do. It's just that we've not found a way of achieving it yet in this country. But that doesn't mean to say it will be impossible. And I just think the circumstances now have never been more, you know, relevant to make that come about, because the thing I used to always argue is that we should work through the Labour Party in the way which Graham still seems to be clinging to even now, even though it's the Norwegian blue dead parrot. But we saw what happened. We got the mass movement, we got the left-wing leader, and we still didn't have control of the party. And the so-called left in the parliamentary Labour Party, what an utter waste of space they are. Talk about cowards and traitors in the line in the red flag. Goodness gracious me. That could have been written for the parliamentary Labour Party, couldn't it? The left in the parliamentary Labour Party, anyway, it does not exist. It's talk. You know, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk, and talk is cheap. Some of them make great speeches, but when it comes to the crunch, they're nowhere to be seen. And the latest example of that, of course, was the fairly modest statement from the Stop the War campaign, as I think Graham mentioned earlier, they took their name off. Pathetic, utterly pathetic they are. And if we're putting any trust in those, if we're looking in any way, shape, or form to salvation from the Socialist campaign group, we might as well give up now. They are utter waste of time, comrades. Forget them and move on.
Can I actually bring up something here as well that I think is pertinent? Because I think it's an issue, and it's an issue that we don't speak about very much, the position of Jeremy Corbyn here. Because some see him as a focus for opportunity, i.e., let's listen to what he says. You know, when he comes on, thousands of people are there, you know, and when is he going to start a new party, etc., etc. Some of us see it as an actual bar to progression, i.e., that until we actually stop looking towards Jeremy to lead us, we won't go any further. What do you think on that, Graham?
Well, firstly, I will answer that, but I just want to, I'm going to answer that. I'm going to answer it, but I'm going to answer it in my own way, comrade. So let me
get chucked off of any other TV show for his, yeah, exactly.
No, I've seen how they do it on Panorama. Now look, Chris.
The way they do it is push the button.
I love this. The Labour left is dead. Well, let's just wait a moment before we see this. Let's just see
the parliamentary Labour Party. I said.
Let's just see the strength of the vote for the left candidates for the NEC, for Naomi and the rest. Let's just see how that goes before we write things off. And my God, we've had this so many times before. But yes, I'm for left unity on the very many issues on which we agree. We don't refuse to work together, Chris, on the many issues on which we agree. And where we don't agree, we can't work together. And we can't manufacture agreement. Sorry, Jackie, I'm going to answer your question, but unfortunately, could you just repeat it? What was the question?
Don't rely on Corbyn as the leader.
We rely on Jeremy? Look, Jeremy is a good comrade of mine. He made important mistakes, but like me, and to some extent probably like Chris, he doesn't represent the future of our movement. At best, we can all play a helpful advisory role in trying to build up the new levels of struggle for the new generation of fight. The problem is, let me just say this, I've spent my whole life saying we've got to lay down traditions so that future generations can learn from them. The problem we have is, of course, that time is running out with the climate crisis. And if we do not act quickly, then there won't be future generations left to learn from whatever we can do. I think that Jeremy represented important gains and also important limitations. In a nutshell, as I said at one of the other meetings where I spoke on one of your platforms, other platforms, Tina, what Ben and Jeremy represented with their challenge to the old Labourism, their challenge to the British Constitution, which was the untrammeled role of Parliament without the mass movement from below. What he represented was revolutionary in implication, but neither Ben nor Corbyn were revolutionaries. And that's the conundrum we're in. So these are not easy answers. Can he play a role? Yes. Is he the answer? No. And I'm sure Jeremy himself would say the same thing.
And I think we're kind of politically, well, I'm kind of politically between Chris and Graham somewhere. I think as long as the Labour Party has the unions affiliated, it is hugely important that socialists orientate towards the Labour Party, but not exclusively. And I want to ask you that, Graham, because I think it's something that's come up over and over again. I mean, socialism will not come through Parliament. I think we agree on that. And very unlikely the Labour Party will play a leading role in, introducing socialism or helping to achieve socialism. Does it not need the political expression on another level? So we engage with the Labour Party because it's there, and the working class, if we like it or not, still sees it as their party. But at the same time, we need to organize something different that does talk about overcoming capitalism, and that does, talk about the need for a revolution. And I disagree with you when you say, well, we can't agree, we can't work together. Yes, we can. We don't agree on this, we work together. I think we can build something that actually allows differences and allows us to work together, even though we don't agree on every dot and comma.
Yeah, okay, there's something in that. Now, let me just say this, that Tony Benn used to refer to the crisis of representation. It was that which helped the Labour representation, the LRC, set up 20 odd, 30, whenever it was, 20 odd years ago. And that, in a way, began to be overcome in the Corbyn years. And now we've gone right back. And is there a need for revolutionary politics, a revolutionary pole of attraction? Of course there is. But just think about it. How can we work together on a number of things, but how, say, could Chris and I work together on the Ukraine, for instance? I mean, I'm not an extreme on one side or the other. I think Chris is. It's very, very difficult because we actually don't agree. And we can both agree, for instance, on the central role of NATO, but we wouldn't agree on the legitimacy of the resistance of the Ukrainian people to the attacks of Putin. So on that issue, it's with the best will in the world, with as much respect and love as we have for each other, we couldn't really work together. But on the question of Palestine, we can work together.
Okay, can we then ask Chris, is there not a space for an organisation where on the things we agree with, we work together, and those that we don't, we don't. There has been a sort of an almost, I think, false and sort of stricture within the left that you either all agree with each other or you don't. And actually, that in itself made the witch hunt worse and continues to make the witch hunt worse. That you either had to be in or out a series of sort of issues.
That was the premise on which we established Resist. It was what we talked about was trying to be the glue to bind the left together in that sense, to bring people together. And I think we've had some good success with that, for example, in preventing a clash of alternative candidates to the Labour Party in Erdington. There was a possibility of the Workers' Party and Tusk standing, and anyway, we managed to sort of, through our good officers, prevent that. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we've said is that let's agree where we agree, is what you've said, Jackie, and have comradely disagreements on those areas where we don't. But I think Graham is wrong to say that we couldn't work together in relation to Ukraine. I think where we could agree is on working towards a peaceful solution. And that peace is far better. I mean, even Churchill talked about George Orwell being better than war. And well, I think Graham would agree with me anyway. Maybe he'll contradict me if he doesn't. That what the British government should be engaged in, and what the Labour Party should be arguing for, is that Britain uses, its diplomatic, or should be using its diplomatic influence to bring about talks, to bring an end to the hostilities, and to find ultimately a peaceful resolution to the situation that is just a disaster for people in Ukraine. I mean, I'd like to think Graham would agree with us on that.
I agree with diplomatic solutions and a peaceful end, and the stopping of the attacks on the Ukrainian people, and the stopping of NATO's constant move eastwards. Yeah. Neither Washington nor Moscow.
Okay, I think let's not get into the Ukraine. What I'd say though is that any democratic organization could have minority and majority views. You don't have to agree on everything. As long as we say it's okay to have differences and you can express them in our newspaper, for example, I don't see any problem with having people with different views. We want to open up now though, really, don't we?
Yeah, time to open up.
Yeah, so I think we got about, Jackie, do you want to lead this?
Okay, we're going to open it up. Can I say to people, please, and I think we're going to be stricter, or you're going to be better behaved than some of our panelists and actually agree to be mediated by this. We want to give everybody no more than 3 minutes so that we can get a chance of hearing what everybody actually wants to say. So Jessica, can we unmute Jessica, please?
Yep.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi. Okay, so I've been listening to all of this, and I'm getting increasingly frustrated with the discussions. The thing that I keep seeing over and over again with all these different groups that they're on the left, and what I think is needed, is a complete lack of collaboration and using the resources that we have in order to bring together the left in one place. So, for example, when there's an action or a protest, how do you find out about that unless you're connected to that particular movement, or unless you know somebody in it? It's often right at the last minute that I get to find out about things, even within the movements that I'm connected to. So I think there's a lack of centrality here that needs to be addressed. And I think one of the easiest ways that we can do that, and we have people on this call, I'm sure, who are more than qualified to put themselves forward and to offer their help. We need to use our online skills to make that happen. Because at the moment, people who should be at the forefront of this fight, people who are the very, those very people that we're talking about who are at the sharp end of this poverty crisis we're in, are unable to even represent themselves because they don't get to find out about the things that are going on around them. So, I think that's something that I would really, really like to press for. And it means having a website, having an app, having something online that people know to go to when they want to find out about what is happening in their region, in their area of the UK. So I really wanted to put that forward this evening.
Okay, thanks very much. I think that's very useful. But can I remind people, we would love to actually have an app to do something like that, but we need finances to do it. And it's very hard to raise money to do that. We keep putting our appeals up. We keep saying the more we get, the more we can do. At the moment, I think we're running at about £250 a month in terms of contributions. We could easily double that, and still need more. So if people want to see that kind of thing, there is one thing that you can do, which is help to fund it. Okay, next I think is, doesn't look that, am I saying it right, is Alan Gasparuti?
Alan Gasparuti, just called me Alan. I'd just like to say, Labour are dead. Peterborough, for the last 2 years, the eastern region has destroyed the Labour Party in Peterborough. They suspended 14 members last April. It destroyed any chances of getting any more councillors, etc. This April, they didn't take in some councillors that suspended. They put another candidate against them. We lost the ward to the Tories. Now they've gone and insisted on that they've rejected 6 local candidates for the possibility of having become the next MP, and they've thrown in people from elsewhere, probably from the right. Labour are dead. We've got to get rid of this idea of let's fight on for Labour. Labour are dead. Forget them. All other minor groups need to get together. Even if there are differences, we all have the biggest thing in common is we have to fight the Tories, not each other. We have to fight the Tories. So let's all work together. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Eric Davis. Eric Davis, are you there?
You need to switch on your camera, please, Eric.
Eric Davis. Okay, let's go to Steve Freeman then, please. 3 minutes. No, you're muted.
Sorry.
Oh.
Sorry, my link is weak, obviously.
Start that again. Sorry about that. Okay, start again. The biggest thing we need to have in common, as Tina will tell you, is a programme. That's what we need, a democratic and social programme. That's absolutely urgent. Otherwise, we're just going all over the shop, picking things out of the air. And the latest thing, of course, is left public opinion. Because we've got a crisis of democracy, left public opinion is now switched behind PR. The PR is not going to be a solution. It's not even going to work for this particular problem, because the problem is much deeper than that. It's the constitution that's in crisis. The union with Scotland's in crisis. The situation of Northern Ireland's in crisis. The lack of democracy in England, the democratic deficit in England, and the rise of English nationalism. That means and we've got the proroguing of Parliament. We've got the ministerial code. All these things are broken. Everybody understands our political system is broken, and nowhere's more broken than Westminster. So we have to address politically, if we're going to look to the future, how we deal with a whole series of democratic questions. And that's what we have to address. And until we've got that, we will be going all over the shop, whether you're in the Labour Party or not in the Labour Party. Somebody on the chat mentioned Tony Benn. Well, at least he had something to say that was pointing us in the right direction. So we need to go back to that. Otherwise, it'll be this shibboleth or that shibboleth.
Okay,
so those are the things we must address.
Okay, can we now go to Eric Davis? Are you ready now? Unmute.
I think he's got a problem with his internet. Oh, there he is.
Eric?
Unmute yourself, Eric.
Okay, let's go to Matthew. Matthew?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks, comrades. No, I think there's some key stuff from Corbyn. I mean, what Corbyn demonstrated was exactly that the Labour Party has done. And what the thing is that it's integrated. It's quite clear that the bureaucracy of the Labour Party is integrated into the state. The Labour Party actually forms a part of the mechanism of control for the ruling class. And unfortunately, because Jeremy being a reformist, he was afraid to take it on. the point of Corbynism was precisely if it had some internal political coherence, but it would have split the Labour Party. No question of it, because quite clearly the right wing and the Labour Party bureaucracy are there to do a job for one lot of people, and completely against the interests of the left and the working class. That's who they are. And the thing about what we're left with, of course, is a situation where it's then down to the question, well, can the left actually organise itself and produce some kind of political alternative? I mean, I think the key point here is a political alternative and a programme, as people have said, although in a confused way. I mean, if we look at Sri Lanka, for instance, I mean, the people in Sri Lanka now have stormed the government buildings, the president's palace and the prime minister's palace and the secretariat, and brought down the government, but they don't have an alternative. So the thing is, if we have an upsurge now, I mean, it's quite possible. This is the problem. This is the problem you've got, of course. There's a situation where, under conditions where you could have a general strike in this country, no question. The union bureaucracy are terrified of it. This is why the RMT have refused to call any more strikes. This is why they don't want, there's a distinct reluctance to do this, because it could bring down the government, and it should bring down the government. The question is, what alternative government have you got? As the point was made in 1926, of course, so the TUC, well, gentlemen, you're now in charge. What the hell are you going to do? They said, well, obviously we've lost. So that becomes the question. Is that, the core is to say, right, well, clearly the Labour Party is dead. That's to be declared so. As we can see in the rest of Europe. I mean, look at all the reformist parties in Europe. The PS in France is gone. The PCI in Italy. The PS in Italy, PSI in Italy. Greece, PASOK, Syriza, the whole lot. All collapsed. We can go through the whole list. Even the SPD is looking like distinctly sick Paris. But these things are finished because they've got no alternative. There isn't a clear method out of the capitalist crisis. The fundamental driver here is the fact the system itself is in gross crisis. And we're now looking at a large section, both the climate crisis and the fact they intend to starve a large section of the population. Okay. That's what's coming in the next year.
That was
okay.
Right. Thank you. Jackie, shall we let the...
Yeah, that's what we were doing. I don't know if there's anything there that you want to come back on, Graham. I think we should give the panelists 3 minutes as well.
Sorry, this isn't, have we finished now? Or
no, just if you want to respond to something that was said.
Do you want to respond to anything
No, I'd much rather just do that at the end, thank you.
Oh, okay. Right.
How about you, Chris?
I'll quickly respond because I'll forget otherwise. Let me just agree with Jessica in regards to what she was talking about the website or an app or something. But I think that's only part of the solution. I think what we need is that community organising, because even if we had an app, even if we had a website, a lot of people in working class communities wouldn't necessarily know where to look unless we're actually kind of organising on the ground. And that's even more expensive. And that's what was so exciting about, even though we didn't really go into it as much as we should have done. I think when Jeremy was leading, we set up the community organising unit. The point that Alan made really kind of reinforces, I think, some of the stuff that I've been saying. And when I was going around, I sort of keep going back to the Democracy Roadshow, but one of the things I used to say at the Democracy Roadshow meetings was that if we closed down the regional offices, not only would we not miss them, but there would be a positive benefit. And at every meeting, there was a huge cheer for the very reasons that Alan set out there. I mean, they're an anti-democratic dead hand. Obsessed with ridiculous bureaucracy rather than being kind of a facilitator, as it were. And I was arguing that they should be exclusively focused on developing constituencies, political education, that kind of thing, and community organising in working class communities. On Steve's point about the Constitution, I agree with what he's saying. However, what I would argue is that the electoral system is part of that constitutional crisis and that we need to address that. And the first past the post system is not fit for purpose. And that is a key part, in my opinion, of the Constitution that needs to be addressed. And finally, just Matthew's point, I think, again, is point which is well made, something I've been saying for a long time, is that it is an establishment tool. It always has been to a greater or lesser extent, but it's been brought into sharp relief, I think, with what we saw when we got somebody like Jeremy in the position, and when we got the result that we achieved in 2017, it fricked the bejesus out of the establishment. And they were absolutely determined to smash him. And sorry to keep going back to the Socialist campaign, but were utterly pathetic in not actually standing up. And I'm sad to say, Jeremy didn't stand up either. He capitulated too, and just made it worse for himself. I mean, I remember having an argument just in conclusion with one of the people in Lotto, because they were forever going on about saying, "Oh, why have you said this and why have you said that?" And their view was that I said that nothing I've said isn't what Jeremy's already said in his leadership campaigns, and the response was, well, yeah, but that was a leadership campaign. We're now a government in waiting. That was the mindset.
Yeah,
that's what was wrong.
Okay,
it's a challenge.
Thank you, Eric. Are you ready yet? No, not hearing you, Eric.
It's really choppy. His picture
okay.
is not going to work.
Tony Greenstein, please. 3 minutes.
Ouch.
Okay, thank you, comrades.
Yeah.
A few comments. First, I mean, we're holding this meeting and many other meetings in the wake of a severe political defeat, namely the defeat of the Corbyn movement. But there was one thing that the Corbyn movement did show, which was that radical and socialist ideas, for the many, not the few, and all of that entailed, had a great mass appeal. We saw that in the 2017 general election. But the Labour left, because of its historical weakness, was unable to build on that, and if you like, seize power from the Labour right. I think today it's quite clear that the Labour right is absolutely determined, at the cost of electoral defeat if necessary, to ensure that the left never regains power or office in the Labour Party. So I think those who are pursuing the idea you can change the Labour Party are fundamentally mistaken. But the second thing is, we do now have an upsurge in working class activity, and the conditions are right for a mass struggle. And it's not only the industrial struggles, but the fact we have a mass cost of living crisis epitomised by the energy prices, which are unaffordable for millions of people. Maybe half the population cannot afford to pay what is double and more their prices. So there is a potential for a mass movement. So I'm slightly surprised that talk of a can't pay, won't pay campaign and how you meet that crisis has barely been touched about. Yes, I support PR. I support many other things. But to be quite honest, it's a red herring at the moment. It's a distraction. It simply isn't the main issue. If you think that someone who's faced with an electricity bill they can't pay is going to say to their partner, we must have PR, otherwise we simply won't be able to get out of our problems, you really are living in cloud cuckoo land. The left needs to abandon some of its obsessions, like Steve Freeman's obsession with changing the Constitution.
Okay, Tony, can you wind up now, please?
It's not the issue. Yeah, I mean, I'll certainly wind up, but simply to say, I think we have to put real pressure on Corbyn and the left MPs who are going to be deselected to actually stand independently as a new political party and to challenge the Labour Party and, incidentally, the trade union leadership, which is its backers in the end, because the trade union leadership has been pointed out are fighting in order not to have a fight. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Leah Lefane.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Sorry. Well, everyone's agreeing about mobilizing on the ground, building the movement, because we've had this horrendous setback. And so people are demoralized. And we've all got very excited about the wave of strikes, and I think there will be more. Barristers being on strike, etc., is not the most exciting thing, but it is really indicative of a change. But we know that even though unionization presumably will increase, I know the inquiries have gone up. I don't know if the numbers have yet. it's still a minority. It's still, there's lots and lots of people in these very, anyway, we all know that. I'm very surprised that no one has mentioned the People's Assembly. Not just because when I turn my camera off, it says Hastings People's Assembly, which I'm trying to build locally with some, obviously with others. But I just see that it's got trade union involvement. It's not party political. It's not at the moment, certainly thinking about standing, but I'm interested to know what people think of that as a potential for bringing people together around the sorts of issues, the cost of living crisis, obviously the key one. And actually, I mean, the TUC demonstration a couple of weeks ago with "We Demand Better" was such a pathetic slogan. And I know in the People's Assembly Network, we were talking and had many, many much more radical slogans, much more clearer demands. And at the moment, I think people are sick of parliamentary politics and they see politics as being about Parliament. And I see the People's Assembly as one way of actually mobilizing and doing the political education without necessarily having a party and a candidate's tag on it. So I'd be interested to know what people think. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that.
Shall we have responses, Jackie, you think, from Graham?
I think we should go for a couple more, seeing as Graham didn't want to respond, wanted to wait till the end. So why don't we have Jane Wilson next, and then we've got one more. Jane Wyman, sorry. Jane Wilson. Yeah, Jane Wilson. Can you unmute?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi. A bit of the past, you know, I was one of those single moms in a squat in the 70s that was encouraged into a polytechnic. And it's interesting, and listen to what's going on now. Even back then, the left spent more time fighting each other than getting the stuff done on the ground. And I noticed that I, like many others, have put more energy into community activism, but have a frustration about the lack of a basic framework of understanding. So I've heard political education come here and there, and boy, were we blessed. Because although I didn't go into politics, I went into psychology, worked in Muirhouse with the druggies, and do drug policy for the party when there was a policy. But, you know, we need to think about how we knit this together, how we deal with these issues, and how we find some common ground. And I really feel that some of the ways in which we can basically understand what's going on out there and get to common ground is the only way to move forward. Or from the 70s onwards, man, how long ago is that? 52 years ago? And we're still at it. I'm listening tonight. Get the boxing gloves on, boys. Have a go. You know, we need to come together, and we need to have some political education that gives us some common ground from which we can move forward, or else we're just battling each other. Anyway, I'm past my sell-by date and not up to the granular details of the current debates, but I just wanted to throw that in, so thanks.
Okay, thank you. And last, I've got Sandra Wyman.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
I'm told the host wasn't allowing me to be unmuted. Right. I think one thing we do have to take into account is if you look at the voting figures in elections, the vast majority of the country is not engaged politically. And that has probably always been the case. But people have been engaged in particular movements. And, you know, things like Extinction Rebellion draw an awful lot of energy together to actually make things happen, to take on what's happening from above. And I think we do need something that isn't just a top-down reproduction of what we've had before. And I would include PR in being a top-down reproduction, actually, because I don't think it's going to work. I'd agree with Graham totally on that. What is working, and the last time I saw Jeremy Corbyn speaking was at Labour Roots in Leeds, and it wasn't the speech from the platform that impressed me. It was actually the thinking that went on in the small group discussions and the way we involve communities in the struggle, and the way we politicise people through involving them in specific struggles. Organisations like ACORN, for example, do an amazing job in politicising people. Extinction Rebellion I've mentioned. At the moment, disability politics, which is not the sort of identity politics that gets deplored by the left, but which is actually socialist-based politics. The move towards action, because so many people are being endangered by government policies. Those things can be developed, they can come together, they are the way, including the unions, and the unions are very, very important in this, that people engage. And that is where we need to be working. We need to work up from there. Previous speakers have mentioned similar things, so I won't say more on that now.
Okay, thanks very much. All right, perhaps Graham then would like to do his summing up at this point.
Comrades, obviously the left is in real difficulties. We have suffered a severe defeat with the loss of Jeremy Corbyn. And this comes after a decade, a generation or more of industrial defeat. And that sort of is the material basis for the weakness and splintering of the left. And yet, I can say in my lifetime, we talk about how the left can get together. I've seen the left get together on so many occasions. I look back at the 1970s demonstrations, hundreds and hundreds of thousands demonstrating together from all wings of the movement against the Tories' industrial legislation. Well over 1 million on the Iraq war. The wonderful demonstrations a year or two ago on Palestine. And we've seen, all of us, I hope, here today, when we've attended RMT picket lines, all sections of the left united in class action. So it actually isn't the case that we don't work together. We do work together very, very often. So the question is how we can build on what is happening in front of us with the limited but very important resurrection of trade union action. And I think that we've got to be open about this. There's a real crisis of representation. That, I mean, I accept the point that was made, that this, I think it was from Jackie or maybe someone else, that the chances of getting new Labour left MPs in the current period is really very, very low. It was even more so than it was in the Blair years. And although there wasn't that witch hunting, it in a sense wasn't necessary because Blair had such control over the party. And this represents to some extent the weakness of Starmer and Evans, that they have to take this action in a sense that the Blair regime didn't. Now, it's one, I think it was a comrade Allard who said, forget Labour. Well, if I tell you, I'd make this pledge to you, Alan, if I could forget Labour, I would. Okay, I was a member for only 53 years, and if I'm honest, I'm more than happy not to be a member now. But forget Labour? Well, if you're going to forget Labour, let's forget the Tories. You don't like them, they're no good for us. Let's forget Parliament. Let's forget councils. I mean, it isn't as easy as that, is it? We actually have to operate in the situation in which we are. A comrade, I think it was Jane, said, get your boxing gloves on, have a go. And that's what the movement is actually beginning to do. But that kind of spontaneous action, which does create unity, as others have said, isn't enough. We've actually got to build the alliances across the Labour trade union divide. And it goes beyond that, of course, all the social movements, the struggles for disability rights, etc. And I suppose my abiding memories and the best political memories of my life was when the left, the Labour left actually, gave us all a vision of what was possible. When Ben was fighting for the deputy leadership in the early 80s, in backward Ilford, the school hall was filled to overflowing to listen to Ben of several hundred. I remember in so-called backward Ramsgate, in Thanet, where I live. Jeremy came to speak to us only 5, 6 years ago. There were 3,000 people on the streets to listen to him, and that number was exceeded many times over in other areas. And there were these wonderful banners in the flats overlooking the area where we were standing. Ramsgate welcomes Jeremy Corbyn. And these visions of the future. I mean, with Ben, it was where the Labour left, the trade unions, etc., actually united with the growing, burgeoning feminist movement, with the burgeoning anti-racist movement, because he gave hope to those movements. And Ken Livingstone with the GLC, where he actually gave voice to all of the struggles of the anti-racist, the feminist struggles of gays and lesbians, of the struggles for a united Ireland, for instance. And okay, he gave that vision. And it's those visions of class unity that we need to hang on to and try and rebuild in the most difficult of conditions. And I will work with anybody where it is possible. And we must all do that. It is sometimes difficult if some of the people that have been mentioned, for instance, are opposing us on the struggle of asylum seekers, when one left party actually, or the leader of one left party actually in Glasgow opposed the rights of asylum seekers. Chris, it ain't always that easy, but we must do our best. And it's all I'm saying is finally this: there are no simple answers, and to say the Labour Party is dead, let's build something else, and together, if we get a stitch up of all the left groups, that'll be the answer. Comrades, that is living in a bit of a dreamland. With the Labour Party, fighting the Labour Party to the extent we can, outside if we must. And my final words,
Graham, 3 minutes.
In the beginning and in the end is the class struggle. Thank you.
Minutes. Chris, if you could just keep it to 3 minutes, please, I'd appreciate it.
I will endeavour to do so, comrade. I mean, I think in terms of living in a dream world, I think anybody who thinks there's any future in fighting to resuscitate the left's influence inside the Labour Party is genuinely living in a dream world and hasn't really benefited from the light of experience. We've been through that, as I've already mentioned tonight, Jackie, where we had a mass membership, we had the public overwhelmingly supportive of a left programme, we had a left-wing leader, and we still couldn't get control of the party. Now, that was down to failings of the leadership in the party, but we are where we are. We're never going to get that opportunity again. And I think it was unfair when Graham sort of poo-pooed Alan's proposition of saying forget the Labour Party. I think, if I can speak for Alan, I think what he was saying was forget the Labour Party in terms of focusing any energy in trying to regain some sort of influence over the Labour Party. What I think we need to be doing, and what it would be much more productive if we were to use all the energy that we've expended in the past in trying to gain some sort of influence inside the Labour Party, if we use that to build a grassroots movement and to build an alternative political representation. Because for all of those great highlights that Graham identified, it has been a record of failure of the left when it's been trying to use the Labour Party as the vehicle. So I think it's time to change the vehicle. Let's see if we can build a different model, because the old one certainly hasn't worked. And what I would just quote the words of the song by Yaz, comrade. We're so low now, comrades, the only way is up.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for being succinct. I want to point out something here, that we're actually trying to model something here on Red Line, which is the fact that you can disagree, but you can come together and discuss. And this brings me to the point, which I think is one of the basic problems with the left and with the left media, many other platforms who do this no platforming thing. The left has got to stop no platforming the left. We are doing the work of the right for them. And, you know, we have a huge amount. I'm so glad that Graham said that about coming together. The left, we must be very careful of believing the tropes that the right use against us. We're extraordinarily powerful at coming together. We have put hundreds of thousands of people on the streets We've changed policies by our mass action and solidarity, and that's what we must remember. But we must also remember the way that those strategies have been sabotaged, and how much and how often that has been sabotaged by the Labour Party. Now,
can I say something, Jackie? Because I think it's quite important that we, as long as the Labour Party is seen as the working class party, and it still is by large sections of the working class, I think we have to have an orientation both to the Labour Party and towards building something new. And I think that should be our sort of message going out from tonight.
I have no problem with that, but what I'm saying is, it's still a truth how often those movements have been sabotaged by the Labour Party itself, and that's what we have to learn. Can I say that next week's programme is actually going to be about the cost of living, and talking about the cost of living and the importance of having social media. Somebody made, I think, an important suggestion, which is that we shouldn't just depend on people paying towards Patreon or PayPal. We should perhaps now consider people paying for Zoom. We do need more money to build this. We need your money to actually build a movement that can be all encompassing and can disagree and move forward. Thank you very much, and see you next week, 7 p.m. for the cost of living debate.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, comrades.